Today I want to talk to you about fairy tales and Proto-Indo-European. Sleeping Beauty, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, Red Riding Hood, Hansel and Gretel, Cinderella, the Frog Prince. These are all very well-known fairy tales nowadays, and when we think about fairy tales, there are several names that come to mind, including the Brothers Grimm. Wilhelm and Jacob Grimm were born in Hanau, near Frankfurt, towards the end of the 18th century. They both studied law, but when their mother died and left them and their brothers and sisters behind, their father had already died when they were still young, they became librarians to support their family. The choice to become librarians also had something to do with their passion for German folklore. In their spare time, they collected fairy and folk tales from friends and guests, which they had heard from servants, local peasants, villagers, or from published works in other countries. Red Riding Hood, for example, was supposedly told by Dortchen, a childhood friend, and later on Wilhelm's wife. The brothers had very different personalities. Jacob was more introverted and physically stronger, and was the academic of the two. His interest was more towards the research for folklore and the constantly changing word sounds over time. Wilhelm was warmer and not so physically strong. His interest was more towards the literature part. And so the brothers published their first collection of 86 German fairy stories in 1812, Kinder- und Hausmärchen, or Tales of Children and the Home. However, these were certainly not the fairy tales we are accustomed to. They were earthly tales, full of cruelty and hunger and loss, of witches and trolls and ravaging wolves prowling through dark forests. Mothers, not just stepmothers, were evil. A wicked queen was forced to dance in red-hot shoes until she died. A servant was put into a nail-studded barrel, and a witch baked alive. Children were abducted by a pipe-playing rat-catcher. Even the Frog King was thrown against a wall to wake him up, instead of being kissed. And then there was a period in which life just went on, until there was a flourishing period of children's literature in Europe. And so the first English translation, called German Popular Stories, was published in 1823. That was a great success, so the brothers selected 50 of their most popular tales, refined and softened them, and published Small Edition, or Kleine Ausgabe, in 1825. The Grimm's fairy tales quickly became classics in children's literature. And what would Walt Disney be without them? He kick-started his whole movie empire with Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Besides fairy tales, Jacob had an interest for phonetic shifts in the German language. He investigated these and by doing so made the Grimm's Law, which is one of the earliest and most important linguistic laws. What is the Grimm's Law actually? Jacob, with some help of Wilhelm, his brother, traced the vowel shifts in various European and Aryan languages, and he discovered that they were all linked to a common root. And then, in 1838, they started a new project called the Deutsche Wörterbuch, or commonly referred to as Der Grimm. Der Grimm is to the German language what the Oxford English Dictionary is to English. They believed it would take about 10 years to finish, but by the time the first volume was published, Wilhelm had already died. Jacob died in 1864 and was only at the F for Frucht. An army of academics continued what the brothers failed to finish, but their Grimm was only completed in 1961. On a different note, let's talk about Proto-Indo-European and what the Brothers Grimm have to do with all of this. More than 6,000 languages are spoken all over the world today. Modern linguists don't think that these languages originated in just one place, but rather that a variety of them evolved among different groups. They believe that all languages can be traced back to about 10 main language families. Jacob Grimm and a handful of others traced back almost all the languages of Europe and some from Western Asia and Northern India to one single ancestor language, Proto-Indo-European. Grimm's law showed how the consonants of different Indo-European languages relate to each other. For example, there is a regular relationship between words beginning with P in Sanskrit, Latin or Greek and F in Germanic languages. So pater in Latin becomes father in English, or pada, pet and pus in Sanskrit, Latin and Greek become foot, voet, foes, fótur and fót in English, Dutch, German, Icelandic and Danish. We think that Proto-Indo-European was spoken more than 5,000 years ago, and as tribes migrated through Europe and Asia, split into a number of dialects, and then in time developed into separate languages. Proto-Indo-European is not the first language of man, it's simply the oldest we have evidence of. And that's it. Thank you for listening.